Today we're going to show you some quick tips and tricks to true out your rifle and get good data from 100 to 1200 plus yards in just a few rounds.
We are MDT. We design, test, and create precision rifle chassis and accessories to help you shoot better.
This can be done pretty simply, but you do need a few tools in order to go beyond about 500 to 1,000 yards. At a very minimum, you're gonna need your rifle and a set of clear, clean targets that have a nice set of either white paint or clear backers. It's very, very helpful to have a chronograph. Next, the solver. You can use something like a Kestrel 5700 or a phone app. We generally have a buddy or two that we'll work with so that they can spot for us and we can spot for them. Once we arrive at our range, we have limited rounds to check if our rifle is performing as expected and that our data is lining up with what we would expect downrange. So here's the process that we're gonna follow in order to save rounds and save time. First, we're gonna zero our rifle at 100 yards.
If we notice that we're about 1/10 of a mil low or high, I'm personally not gonna change my zero at that point. I want to validate the rest of the data that I would get at distance to make sure that that tracks with what I see downrange.
The next step for us is we're going to go further than that distance. In this case, we're gonna shoot about 500 yards. All right, so we're downrange at the 500 yard target. So the first thing we're gonna need is a Sharpie and a tape measure. I'm gonna measure the height. I know we were holding center on this target. So this target measures 19 inches tall. So that means that the halfway point, it's gonna be just around 9 3/4 inches, give or take 9.5 inches. I'm gonna take my Sharpie, put a line at 9.5, right there. Which means if I draw a line across the center of the target where we were aiming, that line is where we expected our data to line up. If we were aiming at this line, again, we kind of ignore wind at this point. We want our rounds to hit on that line as our solver predicts. We have 3 different shooters and we all fired shots that crossed our water line very, very, very well. These lowest shots are just about 1 inch low at 500 yards. That's not something we can solve by just saying hey, we're about 1 inch low at 500, let's make a change. That's inside of our normal group size if you were to convert that to an angle. At 500 yards, 1 MOA is approximately 5 inches. It's a little over 5 inches. So that means if I take this ruler or this measuring tape, 2.5 inches on center means that I would expect for a 1 MOA rifle to be around here to here. Anything between these two bands is considered a good shot if you have a 1 MOA rifle. In our case, we're trying to shoot generally half MOA or better at most of the ranges we shoot. So we can cut that line yet again. That is the margin of error that we are shooting for in competition. If we are between these lines, then our group should have formed up properly and we have a rifle system that is both capable of the precision we want and our elevation is tracking inside of our ability to control it with our group size. If we were shooting a group that formed up here with 3 shots, I would measure the distance from the center of this group. If the group formed up top, we would be about 5 inches above our center line where we were aiming. So I would want to bring my solver, convert this down from 5 inches. I need to change that to the units that I use in my scope, or in this case, 5 inches is going to be about 1 MOA. I would want to bring my scope down 1 MOA, or in the case of mils, about 2.5 to 3/10 of a mil. I can cover most of these shots with a pop can at 500 yards. So if your goal was to hit pop cans at 500 yards, these rifles will do the trick. After we shoot 500 yards, we're going to immediately step out to 800 yards. Now for our rifles and our type of competition in PRS, 800 yards is a pretty average distance for a mid to long range shot. We are gonna shoot another 2 rounds and take the average center of the group to validate that our reticle and our bullets are impacting at the same place. And I've drawn the same lines on this target. We have our waterline reference, which is the top middle between the top and the bottom. We have this line. So this is where our bullets should have impacted, centered on this band between here and here if we were aiming at this line. And you can see we're just a little bit off. We're about 1/2 MOA low. We're about 1/10 low on average. There's one impact here, one here, one here, one here. There's another one here, and another one there. And you can see they're about the same amount under the point of aim as we were on the last year. It's likely because it's the same or a constant shift that our zero offset, or the amount that we said our zero was perfect or not perfect, is just barely affecting our ability to put rounds exactly where we think at those 2 different distances. So again, we're going to apply the same logic. I know that anything between these two lines is effectively good for what we're doing at our ranges. So we will want to take, you know, this group, which this is a bunch of shooters, but I would take any two shots. Let's say it was these two, mark the center, they're good. If I were high again, and my group was forming up here, do the same thing. We would measure from the center of all those groups, or the center of that group, down to our point of aim and say, here, we're about 600 inches, or 6 inches at 800 yards. We're 6 inches high. We convert that, that's gonna be about 3/4 to or so MOA high of our point of aim. We would make adjustments in our solver and our velocity to account for this difference in order to bring our data back in line with where it should be. In this case, like our shots, we each took 2 rounds and all of our shots broke within the margin of error that we had from looking at this target through the mirage, even this early in the morning. And on that point, it's really important that when you're truing, you do this as early in the morning without mirage as possible. The more mirage comes up, the harder it is to make sure that you're aiming where you think you're aiming. So if I just make a dirt smudge here without getting any shrapnel in my finger, let's try right here, I'm gonna make a little dirt smudge. If I think I'm aiming right there, the mirage will cause this target to wiggle in your reticle. Now, it's not actually wiggling, it's sitting here dead stationary, but the target will appear to wiggle, and you may chase that image just a little bit and break a shot either high, low, right, or left. And as you can see, it doesn't have to move very much, only about 1 or so inch from where we think it is to make our group start to look like it's not on center. We want to be careful to have the best conditions possible when we start to go past that 400 to 500 yard mark. We want the best conditions visibly that we can get to get the best data out of our truing session. Pop can still isn't safe. After you've captured the 800 yard data, we're gonna push out one more time. We know that we have the opportunity to shoot 1200 yards, so we are gonna take the same 2-round approach and push it to 1200 yards. At 1200 yards, all of the variables that we have come into play, meaning we're less concerned about wind, meaning left and right, because it takes very little breeze to move your bullet just a few inches at 1200 yards. However, we are very concerned about the vertical or up and down relationship from our crosshair to where the bullets impact. At 1200 yards, between the direction of fire, the wind speeds, wind directions, they can actually all have small impacts on your vertical. So we take very, very careful measurements of temperature, pressure, humidity, firing direction, and what the mirage looks like it's doing so that we can make the most precise shot we can. At 1200 yards, this target is approximately 24 inches total. So it's about a 2-foot target, square. This is the middle that we were aiming at. So from our water line, I had 2 shots with my rifle that brought me about 5.5 inches low. Again, it's a sample of 2. In this case, I'm very confident in my ability to not only make 2 perfect shots, but also the quality of my ammo and the quality of my rifle. So I have fairly high confidence in this, but ideally I'd like to shoot a few more in order to confirm good data and make solid decisions. But for this video, you can see all of us are trending just a little bit low on this target, as we saw on the other 3 targets as well. So at 1100 yards to be 500 means we're about a half MOA low, and that's approximately what we were before as well. We were just about a half MOA low, or about 1/10 or so underneath our point of aim, point of impact. In this case, now we're starting to get to the point downrange where the bullet's drag, or how much the drag changes from shot to shot, and what it starts with, BC, is going to affect where our rounds land in relation to our point of aim. At this distance as well, how well your scope tracks when you dial your elevation to some number, that has to track perfectly, and that's not necessarily the case. Each scope can have a small tolerance of even just, say, 0.5% or 1% error in the amount that it dials up or down can affect your impacts to show up on target, much like this does. So you need to have a way to validate that your scope is tracking 100% and that your gear is doing what you expect as you dial your turrets up or down, or you use your reticle to hold up or hold over or hold down. So on target, I'm gonna say that here we're about the same as the last 3, and that we all probably need just a little bit of adjustment to our 0 offset and maybe a small BC adjustment at this range. But beyond that, even at that distance, you know, here's a pop can for reference. We would have scared a center shot. If we were trying to hit this at 1 shot, we would have scared it pretty good. But once we found the elevation, you know, we can see that most of these groups would have been, this one's a little like 2 pop cans, 2.5 pop cans, little over 1.5 pop cans, and that one is 1 pop can. But even at 1200 yards, I don't think a pop can would be safe with these guns.
After shooting our furthest targets, we're gonna dial back down to our 0, shoot 100 yards, shoot a validation 3-shot group.
What I want to do is compare the data that we had from a relatively good solution to try to make it perfect. And in order to do that, we have to start with a few different things. One, we have to write down the muzzle velocity that we had. I was tracking on the 6.5 that I was shooting. The average muzzle velocity was around 28.35 to 28.40. So let's gonna call that 28.40 when I had the average in. The group here, the initial 0 group that I had, I was aiming at this point just at the bottom of that circle. And the difference there, which I measured out, was about 0.25 to 0.3 inches. That's about 1/10 of a mil. When I came back after shooting 1,200 yards, I went back to 100, dialed to my 0 with wind left 2/10 so I could put my group away from my prior group but use the same point of aim. That just lets me validate that my group is hitting after returning to 0 at the same point where it was previously. So now that we have our zeros and our long range data, I was aiming at the bottom of the circle. I hit about 1/4 inch to 0.3 inches low. That's approximately 0.1 mils for the scope that I'm shooting. So if I put an offset, or I tell my solver in my Kestrel that my 0 height is minus 0.1 mils, that means that I'm aiming at some point and I'm impacting 0.1 mil low of that. My solver will then naturally correct that data for me. And instead of having to adjust my 0 a little bit more and chase maybe a little bit of a differential in 0 each time I fire, instead I can say the average that I have is 0.3 inches low or 0.1 mil. I put in those units with the appropriate offset, and now the solver or your ballistic calculator will do all the work for you to correct all of the ranges. If I looked at all of the 500, 800, and 1,200 yard data, we were also approximately 1/10 low on each of the, for my shots, they were all about 1/10 low. So by applying that 1/10 0 offset, making sure I have the right muzzle velocity, I was able to confirm that all of my data will line up out to 1,200 yards very easily. At the 1,200 yard mark, I was a little bit lower than what I would expect, even for that 1/10. So I changed my BC at 1,200 yards, moved that by 1 point down. So if you're hitting low, your BC is low, therefore bring your BC number down. In this case, I only needed about 1 point of BC. So from a 304 down to a 303 in order to make all the data line up from 0 to 1,200 yards. The truing process is very important. The further you shoot, the more important it becomes. At 100 to about 300 yards, with most of the calibers that you use to take medium-sized game and small game here in the United States, you're gonna probably not need much beyond a 0 and a muzzle velocity. Once you start to get to 500, 600, 800 yards, it becomes very critical that you are very accurately measuring and precisely measuring your muzzle velocity. Beyond the, let's call it the supersonic range, the area where the bullet is going faster than the speed of sound, as you get close to the speed of sound when the bullet is slowing down, your truing process becomes very, very critical, and very small adjustments to minor details in your ballistic data will end up affecting how well you can accurately put a round down range at extended ranges. So for most people, that means inside of 1,000 yards is where you're gonna spend most of your time shooting the cartridges that we have here in the US. That said, that means that you're gonna need primarily a good 0, a good BC validation data, good drop data at those target ranges, and then measuring those offsets to put them into your solver and be more accurate on target.